Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scripture for December the 9th. Your readings today find you in Amos chapters 1, 2, and 3, Revelation chapter 2, verses 1 through 17, Psalm 129, and Proverbs chapter 29, verses 19 and 20. Now, Amos is one of what we would call two justice prophets. When you look at the minor prophets, Amos and Micah are very, very similar books of the Bible. However, the difference is one of them deals with the northern kingdom. That would be this one, Amos. And then the other one deals with the southern kingdom, Micah. Both were done during a very prosperous time for each of those kingdoms. In the particular case of Amos, the people of Israel, the northern Israel, the northern tribes, were experiencing great prosperity. They were relatively safe and secure, but they were not exactly very good in terms of dispensing justice on their own. It's really kind of funny when you look at Scripture how justice is a massive theme all throughout the Old Testament, and God's people always calling for justice and crying for justice. And yet, in the very same other side of the coin, they can be difficult dispensers of justice. The justice for us, a lot of times, is really about convenience, meaning that if it's convenient for us, we're happy to face injustice or cry out against injustice, those kind of things. And this was one of those examples where the people of Israel, the northern kingdom, they were not good about showing mercy and justice to people in need, but instead were looking out for their own interests. Again, another theme throughout the Old Testament and really throughout humanity, if we're being honest. And so Amos is there to warn them and tell them about the consequences of their inability to recognize proper godly justice and to dispense it in proper ways, to help those who were helpless, to look after orphans and widows and those different things. And so God is basically telling Israel, you are now going to receive this justice because you yourself can't seem to get it right. This is a great warning for the churches of our world. We oftentimes are supposed to be the champions for orphans and widows and for the downtrodden and the helpless, and yet we can, much like the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, be caught up in our own comfort levels, be caught up in things that we like and won't necessarily deal with the inconveniences of our lives. And yet Scripture is not compromising on these things. Scripture calls for us to rise up, calls for us to serve the least of these, even when it puts ourselves out. You know, we will oftentimes look for excuses as to why not to serve someone. And Scripture doesn't provide those kind of exceptions. It doesn't say, help the poor unless. Look after the widows unless. That's not what Scripture does. And so we as a church could look at what happens in Amos and we could take it to heart. Not that God's going to dispense that kind of justice necessarily, but be sure that God will eventually dispense justice. Hence the whole 7 churches in Revelation that you're looking at. We get introduced to 3 of them today in your reading. You get introduced to Ephesus, which that one is familiar, book of Ephesians. This is another warning John's writing to them because they have lost their first love, which is, he wants them to come back to them. And then the church in Smyrna. And the church in Smyrna they are poor and yet rich. And he's warning them, Jesus is warning them to stay faithful and they will be really, truly tested. And then the church in Pergamum. And Pergamum, there is one of those churches that kind of gets nailed a little bit, saying, hey, you're in a difficult place. We know you're in a tough place, but however, you have allowed these things to happen. You have started chasing after the things of this world. And so as we look at things like Amos and as we look at these churches, we really need to make sure that we are paying attention to how we are responding in today's world. Are we being the dispensers of God's justice that we are called to be? Are we pursuing our first love? Are we falling prey to temptations and to, in this case, they say talk about food sacrificed to idols and sexual immorality. We have plenty of other idolatry that may not be having to do with food. Are we falling into these things, or are we remaining true to what God has for us? This is a good word for us. It's a good challenge. It's a challenging word. Go figure. All right, that's it for today. We'll talk more next time.